My name is Alexia Cortez, and I am part of the Government Affairs team for the Public Policy Institute of California, or PPIC, as we are widely known as. And we would like to thank you all for spending part of your Friday afternoon with us today, especially for a topic that is very dear to me. I see a few new faces in the audience today, so welcome. And for those of you who are not familiar with our organization, the Public Policy Institute of California is a nonpartisan, nonprofit public policy think tank, and we have offices here in Sacramento and San Francisco. For today's program, we are going to first hear from my colleague, PPIC researcher Joe Hayes, and Joe will tee up today's discussion on the 2020 census and counting the Central Valley. I would like to thank the California Community Foundation, the California Endowment, California Healthcare Foundation, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and Sunlight Giving for their support in our work for the 2020 census. You can learn more about our work on the census by going to our website, www.ppic.org, and look for the Trending Topics tab. There's some really good stuff on there. Following Joe's presentation, we are pleased to have a fantastic panel of experts who have been heavily engaged in ensuring a complete count for the census. And we are fortunate to have Maria Jeans from the Maddy Institute moderating today's discussion. So thank you, Maria. After the panel, we'll have plenty of time for audience Q&A. You should have received an agenda at registration, and all of the speaker bios are on the back. So in the interest of time, we will only do brief introductions today. We also have an online audience joining us today, so hello to them. And we ask that during audience Q&A, you please wait for the microphone because we want your questions captured for our web audience. A few things before we begin. PPIC will be hosting an event on December 12th featuring the California Chief Justice, Tani Kantil Sakaue, in conversation with PPIC President and CEO Mark Baldassare. That event will take place at the Sacramento Sheraton, and registration is open and online at ppic.org. And later today, you will receive a short survey. We ask that you please take a few minutes to fill that out because we genuinely are interested in your feedback, and we're always looking for ways to improve our programs. And lastly, please silence your cell phone. PPIC began preparing for the 2020 census in early 2018. And I've been fortunate to be a part of outreach efforts for the Institute, along with my colleagues in research and communications. PPIC's role has really been to raise awareness about the importance of the census and an accurate count, and highlighting what's at stake for funding and for political representation. And our approach in this multi-year effort has really been to produce a constant drumbeat of fact-based information. And we've done this by producing fact sheets, public events, blogs, and reports. PPIC also produced an interactive map that shows data for hard-to-count communities broken out by county, legislative, and congressional district. Joe will get into that further in his discussion. But this tool has been an invaluable resource for us, and we've used that to drive some of our outreach efforts, connecting our data with those regions that are the hardest to count. I've been astounded with the level of organization and collaboration on the ground. I've seen support in especially the Inland Empire that have clear strategies in play to support a high response, and I'm excited about efforts that are being done in the Central Valley. So with that, let's begin today's program, and help me to welcome up my colleague, Joe Hayes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Alexia, and also thanks to my colleague Beth Elder. The two of them put this together today, and looking forward to it. Thanks also in advance to our moderator, Maria Jeans, and our distinguished panel. I'm looking forward to that conversation once the brief presentation's over. And most of all, thanks to you for coming today and for joining us online. Look forward to your questions afterwards. So the census day is quickly approaching, and where are we at now? A couple of events on the timeline here I want to point out. As of August, census takers visited areas that have added or lost housing in the past several years to ensure that the Census Bureau's address list is up to date. That involved 32,000 workers verifying more than 50 million addresses. The next major thing that's up is in February of next year, the Census Bureau begins counting the population housed in group quarters. So that's nursing homes, residential treatment facilities, student housing, correctional facilities, etc. In March of 2020, cards will be sent out with links for households to respond online. And as everybody knows, April 1st is Census Day. By this date, households will have received an invitation to participate in the census. They can do that online, by mail, or by phone. After that, in May, the Census Bureau begins following up with households that did not respond, and those efforts will continue for several months. By the end of the year, the Census Bureau will deliver apportionment counts to the President, and that following March 2021, the Census Bureau will deliver redistricting summary files to all the states. So the decennial census is critical to California for a number of reasons. Most importantly, political representation. The census count, as you know, determines the number of seats each state gets in the House of Representatives and how those districts are drawn. Also, redrawing of state-level representative districts depends on the census count. The other main reason is for federal funding. The census count ensures that over $600 billion in federal funds are distributed as needed, both across states and then to regions and populations within the states. For 2020, the concern for California is heightened because of innovations in enumeration methods. This is the first time that a majority of responses are going to be sought online. They're trying to get 55% of responses in online. And surveys are going to be harder to field. Individuals are less likely to respond out of privacy concerns on the one hand, but also out of distrust for the federal government. And finally, these threats seem particularly problematic for California because we typically have a more inaccurate count than other parts of the country. And our population that is hard to count is growing. In part, that's because of the housing crisis, but also because of demographics. And we'll see in a minute how our state and this region, the Central Valley in particular, has vulnerabilities with respect to subgroups like children and certain racial and ethnic groups. In 2015, $77 billion in federal funds were distributed to California according to the census counts. So that's about 80% of all the federal funds that we received. This is a big proportion of the state budget. It's about a quarter of the $296 billion for that year's state budget. And federal dollars can account for a significant portion of state spending in each of those areas, ranging from about 10% of the California Department of Education's budget to about 63% of Medi-Cal expenditures for the state. Census count affects also not just the procurement, but then also the allocation of funds. So to take the example of children's programs, the concern is that while the accuracy of the census has improved overall, research indicates that the 2010 census, for instance, failed to count nearly 1 million children aged 0 to 4, and that this undercount has been worsening over the past several decades. So this is the distribution of census count related federal funding. You can see that nearly 3/4 of it went to health programs, another 13% or so for nutrition programs, about 6% for housing, 5% for education. It's crucial for California. So political representation at the national level. If current population trends continue, California will likely maintain its 53 seats in the House of Representatives. But if the census is inaccurate, we could easily lose a seat. So our colleague Eric McGee put together a few scenarios of undercounts in various dimensions. This scenario reflects two sources of plausible undercount. If there's a poorly conducted census overall, one that again undercounts communities that have historically been undercounted, and it undercounts households with undocumented immigrants, this is what the reapportionment map could look like. California would lose a seat. A few Midwestern and Rust Belt states would also lose a seat. And then a few states in the South and in the West would gain either 1 or 2 seats. But even if California keeps all of its seats, population shifts and census counts could affect how districts are redrawn within the state. So, political representation at the state and local level. Within California, there's also the potential for undercounted communities to lose political representation, since the census also informs the redrawing of legislative districts. As we can see here, several Central Valley counties, I don't know if you can see the boundaries very well, but you know where the counties are. Several of these Central Valley counties show high rates of hard-to-count populations. This map shows, in particular, the share of households that are unlikely to respond to census forms and may need follow-up in order to be counted accurately. And this is a screenshot of some interactive maps that we have up at PPIC's website that I believe Alexia referred to. You can find these by going to our website, ppic.org, and just searching for hard to count, and you should be able to bring these up. And a real quick a plug for these maps and what they can show you. These were put together by Tess Thorman and Vicky Xie and Sarah Bone, and they're really valuable. They can show you a few different layers of geography. This is counties, obviously. We can also drill down and look at census tracts. We'll do that in a minute. We can also look at congressional districts, state assembly districts, and state senate districts. And then in terms of the hard to count elements, this just shows the likelihood of no response, but we can drill down more and look at race and ethnic groups, non-citizens, young children, hard to count housing units, and poor internet connectivity. So I encourage you to look at those on your own time. We'll have a few more screenshots in a minute to give you an example. California's challenge in any census year lies partly in its demographics and the recent changes in demographics toward historically undercounted groups. These groups in particular, young children, young men, renters, African American, Latino, or Native American residents are undercounted even in a good census. And a large proportion of our population is part of one or more of these groups. Recall that the counting process starts with mailing addresses. People who live in non-standard housing or in transitional arrangements or unauthorized residences may not be initially targeted by mailings or may not feel emboldened to respond to government inquiry that arrives at that address. In addition, in 2020 it will be likely harder to count immigrants. Increased immigration enforcement has led to distrust of the federal government, even among legal immigrants. And California, as everybody knows, has the largest number and share of immigrants of all the states, both authorized and unauthorized. This distrust of the government is not likely to be limited to unauthorized immigrants. California has also the largest share of citizens living in mixed status households, that is to say a household where one adult is a legal resident and one adult is not. Many citizen children live in houses that are mixed status, and that will likely affect willingness to respond. I should mention again, the citizenship question is not happening, but the damage to the willingness to respond among residents of California may already be done. So zooming in now on the Central Valley, you can still see, I don't know if you could ever see them, but you can see them at least as well as you were able to a few slides ago, the boundaries of the counties, but then now we're looking at the level of census tracts. So we can see the particular elements of these hard-to-count scores. So first, the demographic groups. This region has a particularly high shares of groups that tend to be undercounted in the census, in this case, African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans. And as you can see, numerous census tracts in Kings, Kern, Tulare, and Fresno counties have populations that are at least 70% African American, Latino, or Native American. And you can pick out your favorite census tracts on your own. As I mentioned, young children are also historically underrepresented in the census. There are particularly high concentrations of families with young children in the central and southern San Joaquin Valley. Children under 5 years old make up 8% or more of the population as a whole in Fresno, Kings, Kern, Merced, and Tulare counties, and that's among the highest concentration in the state. In this region, also, relatively large shares of housing units are rentals, overcrowded rentals, and or mobile homes, all of which can make residents harder to find and harder to count accurately. For instance, more than 20% of households live in mobile homes in some northwestern parts of San Joaquin County and some southwestern parts of Tulare County, but those are obviously not the only areas of concern in terms of non-standard housing. So what are we doing? The state, under Governors Brown and Newsom, has taken some important steps to ensure that its residents are counted. As you can see, $100 million were allocated in 2018-19, and a further $50.4 million are proposed for 2019-20 to assist in promoting an accurate census count. The California state level and the county level complete count coalitions, complete count committees? The CCCs, we'll call them, are spearheading the state's efforts. They've allocated current funds toward the state's hard-to-count communities with options for local governments, community-based organizations, media, and schools to receive funding. And finally, community-based organizations and philanthropic organizations are also uniquely positioned to promote participation among their own hard-to-count populations so that all residents are accurately represented. And I think that's a good place to leave this discussion. Our panelists each have some experience working with the CCCs at the state or county level, and each also brings additional experience and perspective to the issue through their own work with what I'll call their day jobs. So I'd like to turn it back over to our panel and our moderator, Maria Jeans, for the remainder of the discussion. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel. We have Jesus Martinez. He is the member of the California Complete Count Committee and Executive Director of the Central Valley Immigrant Integration Collaborative. We have Cindy Quezada. She is the Senior Program Officer for the Sierra Health Foundation. And we have Supervisor Don Saylor from District 2, Yolo County. So let's start this conversation after one more. It's being reiterated how important is the census for us, and specifically the Central Valley. It's been stated that there are large segments of California that are historically hard to count, and that's what we're here to discuss. Who are these individuals? Dr. Martinez, can you tell us how is the Central Valley similar or different from other regions of California, and why it's important to have this discussion?
Thank you, first of all, to PPIC for the invitation to be part of this panel, to be here in Sacramento once again. We've been doing the Central Valley Immigrant Integration Collaborative work dealing with the census since almost 2 years ago, when Cindy, who's next to me, was working for Civic from our organization. We began to become involved in a research project analyzing housing units in some Fresno County census tracts where there was unconventional housing. So a series of studies came afterwards. So there were a total of 3 studies that we became involved in. And in April or so of last year, I was also appointed by Governor Brown to the California Complete Count Committee. And almost right away, also the state of California began to organize a series of regional meetings dealing with the census in different parts of the state. So something like 25 or so regional meetings were organized in May, June, and July of last year. In Fresno, that took place in the early part of May. And the meeting that was held in Fresno brought together close to 100 people or so from different counties in the region. And the state of California held a meeting, very good discussion to get people interested in the census. And then the state of California staff left to have another such meeting in Bakersfield the following day, and then other meetings elsewhere. So what really concerned me and my organization at that point in time was that that interest that was being generated in those meetings was not having any follow-up to be able to really engage people in an effective and consistent manner in the 2020 census. So what we began to do was to organize on our own and in the partnership with other organizations that we've been working with, focused on immigration in particular, which is what we do as an organization, to invite them to become involved in the census, organizing meetings in Fresno, Tulare, Kern, and other counties in the San Joaquin Valley. That for us began like a different area of work dealing with the census. So we had, over the following months, a series of meetings in those different counties, small groups, large groups in other cases, connecting them to the state representatives, connecting them to the Census Bureau representatives. And out of those conversations, several things stood out that go to the question that you asked, Maria. In that, in 2018, and I would say it's to a great extent still up until now, there's a great deal of interest in organizations to become involved in the 2020 census, without a doubt, because the organizations that were attending those meetings, including public sector representatives, work with hard-to-count communities, whether they're low income, whether African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos, homeless, you name it. But the majority of the people who were attending those meetings didn't have any previous census experience. There were only a handful in all the meetings that we held over the years that had any type of personal or institutional experience working with the census. If we contrast that with what was taking place, for example, in LA and some Bay Area counties, where there was an ongoing work dealing with the 2020 census even before 2018. So there was investment, preparation, and experience. Well, that institutional and personal experience has been lacking a great deal, at least in those organizations that we've been involved with. Secondly, the majority of the organizations that also were becoming involved didn't have any census funding whatsoever. And local governments in the San Joaquin Valley, in those counties that we were involved in, also didn't have any local level census investment. So there's a willingness to become involved in the census, but there are no resources, there is no personal experience, there is no institutional knowledge, or has disappeared because of staff turnover. And just from last year up until now, one of the things that you also notice, if you go back to those same people and organizations, even within those organizations, the people that were going to the meetings in 2018, early 2019, there is also staff turnover. So it's an ongoing process of trying to bring census knowledge, awareness, and capacity, which makes it, in that respect, more difficult. And just one last point, not only dealing with immigration, but one of the things that stands out also is that in the San Joaquin Valley counties where we operate, we have some of the highest levels of poverty in the nation, some of the highest levels of unemployment. The immigrant population that we serve also has lower levels of education for the most part than other immigrants. For example, you can't compare farm working population, skills, ability, knowledge to those in the Silicon Valley high-tech industry. That is an entirely different immigration population. So these challenges are part of what we're facing in the Central Valley, that in terms of patterns that we see over the past year.
Specifically about talking about the individuals, Supervisor Saylor, what can you tell us? We have farm workers, we have different ethnic minorities, but what else does this bring to these specific circumstances we have right now?
I want to join Jesus in thanking the PPIC and your sponsors for hosting this event, and for all of you who care and are interested in this topic. This is, I believe, one of our priorities as a state and a nation for the next 6 or 7 months, as we go actually all the way through December of 2021. So the issues that Joe showed in his slide of potential hard-to-count populations include language minorities. Farm workers, as Jesus has laid out, are a particular challenge for us. In Yolo County, with about 225,000 people or so and 1,100 square miles, we have a lot of remote rural settings. That's the same across the Central Valley. So wherever you have a remote setting, a hard-to-reach group, then that's going to present some issues. We have language minorities. Here are language largest groups, of course, English, Spanish, Chinese, and we have a Russian-speaking population in West Sacramento that we want to be sure to reach in some way. Whatever the population is, we want to find a way to reach them through trusted messengers, through local people, through person to person, as well as the technological approaches that we can deploy. In addition to those populations that are hard to count, often it's young children and it's individuals who live in multi-generational or multi-occupancy residences. That's a kind of an interesting phrasing that you saw that you'll see in the various reports. in Yolo County, there's a University of California campus, UC Davis, that has about 37,000 people, students associated with it. 90% of them live in Yolo County, so about 33,000 people are in the hard-to-count population. Some of them live on campus, and we'll get them in that congregate living institutional setting. The rest of them, though, about 28,000 of them or so, live off campus in the communities in Yolo County. That's a hard-to-reach population, and they're often under the impression that they'll be counted somehow in the place where their parents are, their families live. So that's a challenging one. And because of that, we have some interesting strategies in Yolo County to make sure that we count them. Understand, though, this may sound kind of an interesting specific, but in our Central Valley, we have UC Merced and CSU Fresno and CSU Stanislaus and CSU Bakersfield, and we have other community colleges in Chico. And Chico State and Butte Community College has a very large proportion of students as well. So I'm positing that this is a special population in the Central Valley that can make a difference. Because as Jeff Von Keno mentioned, if you undercount one person, it's $2,000 a year or $20,000 over the space of the time the census is in effect. So if we don't count the student population who are renters, living in different kind of group settings, we're leaving out one of the populations that we want to be sure to include.
Thank you, Supervisor. And that's specifically on who are these individuals we're counting, but what are some economic and political factors that you think could exacerbate this problem, and specifically why?
Well, I think I think Joe also mentioned the intimidation factor, that people who are in mixed households where some of the family members are authorized and some are not, even if you're a naturalized citizen now and you are connected to an immigrant family, you may be reluctant to participate. There's also, and that's a fear factor that the current climate in the country has instilled, and we have to combat that. A couple of things about that. The questions on the census don't ask for information that will be harmful to people. They're very simple questions. So that's one thing. A second thing is that census workers have high penalties if they divulge the information in any way other than its authorized purpose. That's a $250,000 fine for an individual who does that. So we can tell people that, but we have to understand that where they're coming from is a sense of being threatened, intimidated deliberately. There's a deliberate intention to have undercounts in California. We will not let that happen. We have to have trusted messengers through groups like our family resource centers. We're putting out notices in every food distribution that the Yolo County Food Bank distributes. We have about 100 distributions a month in different locations. Every one of those is getting a half sheet that talks about the importance of the census. We're trying to reach every population we can. On the university campus, we're embedded in the dining halls, in the health center. Every television on campus will have announcements. The chancellor will send a note. The associated students are sending messages and using their public outreach approaches. The economic impact of failure to count is high. We want everyone to be counted in California. That means the Central Valley as well as the urban areas on the coastlines. Everyone needs to be counted. It's a constitutional responsibility for us. This is no longer the time when Native Americans are not counted, or some people are counted as 3/5 of a person. We have a constitutional right to have everyone counted, and we need to make darn sure that that's what we do.
And Cindy and Jesus, do you guys have anything else to add specifically to these economic and political factors we're discussing?
Well, I wanted to add a little bit about the immigrant profile of the San Joaquin Valley, because it's actually quite diverse and much more than I actually ever expected. And when we were doing these studies that Jesus was talking about, we realized the diversity among the Southeast Asian community, indigenous communities now, due to climate change and political factors. There's a new wave of indigenous population coming that speak languages that aren't really supported by local organizations. But I think that the reason, why that is important because these groups speak languages that aren't supported by either the state or the Census Bureau. And when you take into account that, as was mentioned, there's low educational attainment, sometimes illiteracy. Many of these languages aren't written. And when you look at, the opportunities to respond to this census, right? So you can call in by phone, but how useful is that if nobody on the other line speaks your language? You may not have access to the internet or know how to use it. So yeah, just to emphasize that in the Central Valley is it's quite diverse in its immigrant community, and there isn't that support to participate in the census.
Maria, if I may, very briefly also on the political factors that could impact or exacerbate the situation in the Central Valley. Without a doubt, again, the focus of my work with my organization has been on immigrants. So without a doubt, the political environment that exists at the federal level, dealing with immigration, is having, and will continue to have a significant impact on how people are going to be responding to the 2020 census. Not only with respect to the citizenship question, but the hostile climate against immigrants was present even before then. In Fresno last week, on Wednesday or Thursday of last week, there was an ICE activity that resulted in the arrest of a father who was taking his two kids to school. That is not the only time that ICE has conducted those types of activities where arrests are made when they're taking a child or children to school. The psychological impact on the children that were involved in that and other smaller children has been tremendous. My organization has been in contact with the family directly and indirectly. And those kids are having a lot of problems. If you talk with the media partners that we have in the Central Valley who get tons of feedback from the population at large, also they are really alarmed at the way that immigrants are responding to that situation that took place in Fresno. So that was just one individual incident, but it's part of an ongoing series of anti-immigrant decisions being made that include proposals to increase fees for naturalization, for DACA, for their immigration programs. The attacks also to close the doors on immigrants and so on and so forth. That could go on and on and on. So this is an ongoing political environment that is really poisoning the environment and making the immigrant populations and their family members who are U.S. born, that's one of the most important findings of the study that Cindy carried out during this past year, that the anti-immigrant rhetoric is not only impacting immigrants themselves, whether documented or undocumented or naturalized even, it's also impacting U.S. born children and relatives and friends of immigrants. So it has a much wider impact than the immigrant population in itself. So we're facing now an environment that is poisoning that situation, and we need to counter-arrest that. For us, one of the important messages in terms of political factors and consequences is that we have, and we discussed this very briefly with Supervisor Saylor, we have to make participation in the census almost a civil rights issue. That is our right to be counted. That is the right of immigrants to be included in this nation, because if we do not include immigrants, then we're deceiving ourselves in terms of what nation we are, what population exists in this country. This is a human rights and civil rights issue now for us, that it is the right of immigrants to be included in the 2020 census, and to engage immigrants in that type of struggle, I think, is required in order to go beyond simply the argument that we need to participate in the census because of the financial economic impact that's going to have on the local community, which is important without a doubt, but it's also more than that.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that, currently some of our partners who are undertaking the census outreach work, they're having house meetings and informing people about the census. And immigration is something that comes up at almost every house meeting where, people are concerned that, if they respond to the census, that somehow ICE is going to get that information, right, and come identify them and take them away, or people will say, well, I have an order of detention, and so I don't know that I should participate, or there is a lot of fear around being identified by immigration.
Thank you, Cindy. And now we have a better understanding who are we trying to count. Let's talk about what the actions and what are we doing right now, specifically to make sure that everybody is counted. Specifically with your case, Cindy, California Complete Count Census Office, they have 10 regional administrative community-based organizations that are specifically outreach partners. Can you please elaborate a little bit on how the center at Sierra Health Foundation became the representative for the Region 6 that represents Fresno, Inyo, Kern, Kings, and Tulare?
Yeah, so the center is basically the nonprofit arm of the Sierra Health Foundation. And it has an initiative called the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund. And through the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund, the center had been funding all the census research that Jesus was talking about on housing, and also a larger study across the entire San Joaquin Valley looking at barriers and perceptions and opportunities towards census participation in the immigrant community. So the center had this history of involvement in the census. And although initially it wasn't really a plan to apply to become the ACBO, a number of its 100 partners that it has throughout the 8 counties, approached the center and asked, could you apply and be the ACBO for this? And so basically that we agreed, and we were fortunate enough to get the state award. And the involvement has really been, consistent with, the philosophy and actions of the center, because the partners really are community-driven. They're organizations. They're community organizers. Their day-to-day job is, they're mobilizing, they're organizing, they're empowering disadvantaged communities. So this was, a logical link to become involved in the census. And that, along with the research findings, really directed shaped the strategy that we are implementing right now with respect to census outreach, which is again, it's all very much about direct contact with the community and engaging in meaningful interactions, because that's what that's one of the main findings that we had from this study, was that people really need to work through issues. So it's not a matter of giving some blanket general statement of this is useful because it's going to bring $77 billion to California, to the state of California, and federal programs and such. That doesn't really resonate too much with people, or
So let's talk about a little bit more about that. The center is not just the only organization that is involved in this. What are some promising tactics that are being used right now to making sure that the Central Valley population and residents are involved in this process of the census? What is your experience in some of your organizations so far that are methods that have been effective so far and that are promising to have a good result at the time that they're ready to do the census?
So as the ACBO, we have a three-pronged approach. So the first is we're doing door-to-door knocking, so canvassing. And again, the idea being that, we're having these individual conversations. That is also being complemented by phone banking as well, in a pre-education type of style. The second approach I like very much, and it has to do with community organizing. So many of the partners are, holding house meetings and inviting people and activating a group to become census ambassadors in a sense, so that they can go and spread the word to their family, friends, and neighbors. And this has a snowball effect because that initial group goes on to organize its own house meeting and invites new people to that house meeting. So in that way, it becomes in a movement of sorts, right? And you're getting more and more people involved, and really encouraging those peer-to-peer conversations, which are really important, because it's for example, if you're undocumented but are passionate about participating in the census, then you would probably have a much better better chance of convincing someone in the same situation that you're in than perhaps I would, right? Because you would speak in the same language, or understand the concerns. So that second approach really is about having deeper conversations, and again, having the opportunity to talk through issues and concerns with people. And then the third approach revolves around communication, like media and social media. But there again, what we're supporting is interactive discussion. So one of our main partners for the communications aspect is Radio Bilingüe, which is a radio station that covers a lot of the Central Valley, and it also has a few indigenous language programs. But what we're supporting is call-in shows, so that so you can have somebody like me and Jesus have been on a number of times on a show called Línea Abierta, where you have the person moderating a discussion will be talking about the census, but then people have the opportunity to call in and ask questions. And then, again, it's this whole philosophy of like, let's try and help people think through things. So I would say that's like the overall approach, and it all revolves around that interactive and meaningful.
And I was going to ask Supervisor Saylor and also Jesus if they have specific approaches that Civic has done in your area, or Supervisor Saylor specific in.
So I think one of the things is be nimble and flexible and respond to whatever the communication needs are and connection needs are in your area. Jenny Tan is our Yolo County Complete Counts coordinator. She's here. And one of the, we've shared with you in the back a poster. So one of the things is make it fun, make it a little bit fun, add some color and graphics and expressions. So these are posted all over the place, and we've got a social media schedule that every month from now through the end of April, there are 3 different messages that we're asking all of our partners to transmit out to their networks. But any one mechanism to educate, motivate, and activate is not going to be completely successful. Our family resource centers do home visits with moms with new children, with infants and young children. Those home visits are an opportunity for census outreach. We also have with our family resource centers, people come in for a variety of reasons, to ask for help or to participate in groups or activities. Every one of those is an opportunity for a census outreach. So we're trying to touch every base we can. When you look at our list of activities and partners, UC Davis is a Complete Counts partner with us. We're not relying on some state level interaction among the system partners at the state level. We're going directly to all of the partners at the local level. So by educating people about, this is not about voting, it's about the census. It's not about being a citizen or not being a citizen. It is what it is, and we need to activate, because it's important that our residents are counted, and we're going to be doing it. So be flexible, use your resources, have trusted messengers, whatever the group is, whether it's the church in West Sacramento for Russian Orthodox community members, whether it's the Family Resource Centers, the Associated Students of University of California, Davis, the folks who need food from the food bank, whoever it is, we need to activate in a very targeted way, and it's not just one mechanism to get to the people.
To briefly add to what my two colleagues have mentioned, the state census office, when it began its work and organizing these meetings, came up with two really important words that I think are very valuable and have also guided the work that we're doing. They have it in their census website, that the work that should be done in California by these partner organizations, including the funder organizations, obviously, should seek to coordinate and collaborate in the census efforts. And to us, that's been really important because in those meetings that I mentioned before that have taken place throughout the San Joaquin Valley, from Kern to San Joaquin counties, we see certain patterns in terms of the responses that those partner organizations have mentioned, of how the people they serve have fear and problems and so on and so forth with the census. So for us, it's also very important to continue to have that type of regional dialogue. One of the projects that we're involved in with the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund and other organizations is to try to have regional convenings dealing with the census in order to be able to identify common issues, common problems, to share best resources, best practices, and to approach this complicated census issue from a regional perspective, not reinvent the wheel. If we waste the resources that are very limited to begin with, human and otherwise, in reinventing the wheel in every single city, in every single county, then we're being very wasteful. So coordinate and collaborate. And by collaboration, engaging as diverse a set of partners as possible. One of the things that I really, really loved about this census-related work that we've been doing is that before, our only set of partners were those that work in some way or another with immigrant families. With the census work, we've been in contact with a much broader set of partner organizations and individuals that we would never been otherwise involved with. So for us, it's been incredibly valuable to be able to be in contact with those individuals. But there's still a need for a great deal of organizational capacity building because of the very significant disparities that exist throughout the San Joaquin Valley. And I'll mention two examples, really good. Kern County, Tulare County, for example, Fresno County, have a large number of organizations involved with the complete count committees. To my knowledge right now, and Cindy probably knows better now, to my knowledge, there is no complete count committee in Kings County. There is no? There is no, but there wasn't one up until now. And in Madera County, do they have a complete count?
They just recently started one, yeah.
Okay, so whereas, again, LA has had a complete count committee for I don't know how long, and other parts of the state also for at least a year, if not more. So we're a little bit late in the game. One other example, the final one. When the state of California was hiring staff for the complete count office, it included the hiring of regional program managers. The program managers are the ones that coordinate the state of California's census efforts in that region, working with county governments, with the ACBOs, with CBOs, and others. Fresno's and Region 6 regional program manager was the last one to be hired. I believe it was in April of this year. They couldn't find a large enough pool of people to apply, apparently. The person they hired is phenomenal. She's a really great person, doing a lot of work. But once again, a little bit late in the process from what should have taken place before. So a number of serious issues that arise, but organizational capacity is one of those things that we still need to pay a lot of attention to. So engage more organizations to raise the capacity to be more effective in the work that is being done.
And I want to ask you, we don't want to bring anybody down, so let's talk about strategies that probably the audience joining us today that are interested in the topic, and everybody that's joining us online, is what is the number one thing that we can make right now, which is going to make a substantial difference, specifically now. I want to give you, each of you, about a minute, if you could please tell us what will be the one thing that will make a difference right now.
Well, make sure you have a complete counts committee in your wherever your county is, and connect with them. Spread the word. Talk to the people who you are connected to. Be flexible. The one thing, man, reach everybody you can and make sure that they understand what this is all about. There was a December 2018, the Legislative Analyst Office my former employer, released a report saying, don't worry, if there is an undercount, it won't be too big. I'm not complacent on that. I don't believe that is the case. They talked about funding levels that had not yet been approved for the current federal budget. We need to have them do an update. I think we do have some concerns. We can't be complacent. So number one, don't be complacent. Connect with your community and make sure that the folks who might not be counted are counted, whether they're disabled, language minority, students who are living in rental places, kids, farm workers. Make sure everybody is on the board.
So one thing is hard. I would say
As you can
agree. Well, I would say that, one thing that I'm thinking a lot about is communicating the urgency of participation in the census, but communicating it in the right way. And I still feel that we haven't quite hit it on the mark yet of talking about the census in a way that truly resonates with hard to count communities. So I think it'd be great if we could if we could figure that out, make it something fun, but also really raising the that issue that it is a civil right. It's something that's fundamental to our democracy. But I would say something that's coupled to the communication. I think another thing that's really important is to look at those structural barriers to participation, because it's not all just about messaging and communications. It's also I mentioned a couple of examples. Sometimes people might want to participate, but they don't have a way to, right? Either you're living in a trailer in a backyard, so you're not going to get the invite, and you're not going to get an enumerator visit, or you may not speak a language that's supported, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's as a member of the census community, I would say that those structural barriers are also something that we should really be paying attention to, seeing how those can be resolved.
I would say take advantage of the growing enthusiasm for participation in the census that is evident in the involvement of many organizations and a growing number of organizations, and create the conditions that includes creating the infrastructure that's going to allow hard-to-count populations to participate. One example of that is, for example, yesterday I was contacted by one of the assistant superintendents in a West Fresno County school district. They're very concerned about the populations they serve, hard-to-count communities in those regions, rural, poor, you name it. They're among the hardest to count populations. They want to become involved. And adult school partners in Fresno and south of Fresno, north of Fresno, have been some of our key partners in immigration matters. They are developing some very innovative approaches also to work with the populations they serve. So take advantage of that enthusiasm, of that creativity, of the knowledge they have of the populations they serve. Maximize the impact by providing to them what they need to do a more effective job, and coordinate the efforts so that we're not wasting resources.
Thank you very much. And we have a lot of talk about communication and outreach. So to finish this specific part of the conversation is, what are common misconceptions people have, and how can we combat these misconceptions so this communication and outreach we're talking about is actually effective?
Well, we've heard that some folks believe that this is somehow voting, and it's not. Some believe that the information will be used in ways that will harm them, and we have to find ways to respond to that's more than the pat answer that we might give in an academic-like setting, because it's a felt need. So the myth of using the information for deportation or denial of benefits, the thing is, there's so much information that we give on a credit card application or a Facebook application that many of us work with. So this is less information than that, but that doesn't help somebody they need to hear that in a story from somebody they trust who's telling them what the value of their participation is. So
I think another misconception is that you have to be a citizen in order to participate. And also that this information would be shared with, landlords or housing authority or,
Yeah.
things like that, so.
Jesus, would you like to add anything else?
One of the things that Mercury, the state media contractor, mentioned as part of the work they're going to be carrying out is trying to respond to the misinformation campaigns that either are taking place or will be taking place. I think that's a really important issue that they raised in those conversations with us, and it's something that I personally had not paid as much attention to, but there are going to be active misinformation campaigns beyond the misguided perceptions that individuals might have. There are going to be active campaigns to try to provide misinformation, to persuade people to have, very bad perceptions of 2020 census. In the 2010 case, there were some organizations, community-based organizations in the Latino community that launched campaigns to try to persuade people to not participate in the 2010 census. They had some limited impact, but I think if those types of arguments also resurface once again in the 2020, they're going to be having a greater impact than was the case in 2010. Again, because of what's taking place in federal immigration policies. So we have to be wary of those types of arguments that may come about, and also those active misinformation campaigns that are going to be launched or are being launched by entities that we don't want to mention. One final example, we developed a regional census website. It's called centralvalleycensus.org that we developed for the Fresno County Complete Count Committee. And I developed the website and launched it. Within hours of the time that I launched it, that it went live, I began to get hacking attempts from Eastern Europe. And that has been under attack on an ongoing basis. Had to switch servers in order to protect it. So I just want to give that as an example. Anything dealing with the census, I think is going to be having a lot of attacks against it.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. I think as of right now, we would like to see if any member of the audience has any specific question for the panel. We have some people in the back that have some mics that can bring to you.
Hi, I'm a volunteer on the local Sacramento committee, Sacramento Counts. But I have a question about two. I think it's Joe Hayes who asked the first question. You showed the map with Texas gaining 2 and Florida gaining 2 and -1 for California. But we're actually having an active campaign. Aren't those states going to be much more the possibility of undercount because of voter suppression and so many of their immigration policies? Aren't there going to be greater undercounts in places like Texas and Florida than California, where we're spending $150 million to count people?
States like Texas are subject to some of the same vulnerabilities that California is because of the similarities in population and the high percentages of hard-to-count populations. I have to punt a little bit on this particular question because, as I mentioned, that publication by Eric McGee and some of his colleagues takes into account a number of different scenarios. So that was one of the more dire ones that we decided to put up to show what the vulnerability for California is. I'm not familiar with the assumptions that go into what led Florida and Texas to come out ahead in that set of scenarios where we have a general undercount, but then also a specific undercount of undocumented or mixed status households. So I'm not quite clear on why Texas comes out ahead in that. If you go to that publication, you'll see that there are other scenarios under which Texas comes out in a different situation and either doesn't gain or lose, or perhaps loses a seat itself.
Yeah, I think Jesus has it.
Yep. I don't know also either why Texas would be gaining, but I wanted to share a little bit of info. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was here in Sacramento for a meeting of farm worker serving organizations from throughout the western states, including people from Texas. Texas is not investing a single public dollar in the census as compared to California. But the representatives from the other states that were here in a hotel in Sacramento in that meeting, they also, as far more conservative organizations, none of them were yet involved or engaged in census-related work. The only ones that were involved were California-based organizations. So it is going to impact the populations in those other states. Like Joe said, I also don't know exactly how that's going to be taking place. But what I do know is that in terms of immigrant families, they're also going to be very wary about becoming involved, and they're not going to be having the same type of messaging that's going to be coming from the state governments and from funded organizations that are going to be doing the type of work that is going to be taking place in California. It's going to be far more limited elsewhere.
Thank you, sir. We have.
Hi. Thank you for this today. My name's David Koenig. I work with a Medi-Cal provider, Centene. They have HealthNet, Calviva. Is there a place that we can go to get some materials or someone we can talk to about better coordinating on this? Because I know we could probably be doing a little bit more to help in that effort.
Yeah. Census.ca.gov is the best website to go to right now, not the only one. Census.ca.gov. That's the official state of California census website that has a lot of tools, information, reports. Right now, it's the best one. And they just created a new one with, I think, part of the Mercury funding that was provided. It's called California Census, CaliforniaCensus.org. So that's going to be like a public-facing website with a lot of tools. But right now, census.ca.gov is the one that I would recommend the most.
And I believe with respect to health organizations that they have been convening certain entities around health, so there should be some opportunities.
Hi, this is a question specifically for Yolo County. I reside in Yolo County, and also I think it would apply to other areas of the state. So getting out to hard to reach populations or communities, you mentioned partnering with people at all levels. Have you considered partnering with the public schools? Because my kids, when they go to school there, the teachers talk to them about voting and how important voting is, and then they come home and go, hey mom, who are you voting for? Or why is this important? What do I need to know? And so you start to engage the younger generation so that they also too become voters. And I think it's really important to engage them at the school and maybe encourage teachers, administration to talk about the census so that they can bring that home to their families and talk to them and engage them as well. And also they are also going to be future residents of the state, so they will see this in a positive light.
So we have a list of our partners that is about 8 pages long and very small print, and included are each of the 5 school districts that are primarily in Yolo County. There are a couple that go beyond our county that are borders, and then we have the Yolo County Office of Education. And so yes, we are partnering with the school systems. And not just in a kind of institutional way, but really at the both institutional level and with parent PTA like education nights, and if you have any specific things, locations, venues, groups that you would like us to be aware of and to plug into, Jenny and I would be very interested in that, because the point is being nimble and responding to wherever the people lead us.
The state of the school districts, I think, have become really great partners in these efforts, and I think we're going to be expecting a lot of them in terms of their involvement in the census efforts. But right now, they're involved. The state of California has also developed funding for educational institutions of different levels. So that has been made available to a number of school districts and also county educational offices. But the state of California also established partnerships with the community colleges, with the CSU system, with the UC system. So there are multiple levels, including obviously also the adult schools. That's a lot. There are a lot of information that has been generated around that, and also some resources that can be shared across the regions. For example, also census-related curriculum for different grade levels in the K to 12. Not for every single year, but 3 or 4 different grade levels. 3rd grade, 5th grade, 7th and 8th, something around there. So that's available. It's part of it already in the census.ca.gov website. And they're going to be adding some more materials dealing with curriculum that is based on what LA County, LA City have been doing.
And just as a note, with respect to the ACBO, one of the things that we're looking into is partnering with some schools to see whether we can offer some volunteer opportunities for the juniors and seniors to participate in census outreach.
And there is the ACBO for each of your regions, so you can use each of them. I think we have 2 more questions.
Hi, my name's Sophia. I'm glad to see that Yolo County is so represented here today. I guess my question was about accessibility, specifically like the readability of the materials that the state and the federal government have been putting out. I know that in our county there was like a concerted effort in making those beautiful posters that Don showed earlier that sort of reflected a readability closer to 5th grade, even though our county has a readability that's probably closer to 3rd grade. I'm wondering if Cindy Quezada, sort of in her research, heard any feedback about the way this sort of information is presented to hard-to-reach populations, and if readability is a concern in Fresno County.
Interestingly, there was a time when I was doing some community conversations, and that came up. The fact that, not necessarily with regards to the census, but other forms, that the Spanish wasn't, they couldn't understand the Spanish. And I've also heard that with respect to Punjabi, that the Sikh community, that many of them think that the forms that they access in the Punjabi language, that it's not it's not readable really, right? It's like high Punjabi. It's not something that someone with a lower educational attainment can understand. So I think that is an issue. Not just in Spanish, but perhaps in other languages. So yeah.
Hello. Thank you for doing this. Quick question, please. You had mentioned Mercury Public Affairs. Is there a paid media effort, be it cable, digital, or radio, to soften the ground and educate prior to the door knocking?
That's what Mercury is going to be doing. They're launching statewide campaigns, and part of what I recall from the presentations that they're also seeking to establish a collaboration with the local, regional level entities that are becoming involved, the ACBOs and others. So there is statewide campaigns that are launching in every platform that you can imagine, and also connection with the local, regional level. So they're going to be doing all kinds of different things. There is already some of that information available in the census website that I mentioned before. Census California Census. CaliforniaCensus.org. There is a portal for partner organizations where they can also download a lot of materials and also upload their own that they want to share with the others. So Mercury just launched these efforts at the end of September. So they're going to be, the way they're unveiling their campaigns, it's going to be on a gradual basis. But I mentioned previously that they still were going to be announcing some additional developments in these coming weeks. So there should be a lot of that coming about. But the bulk of the work, from what I can recall, is going to be starting in January in terms of overall outreach and campaigns and everything else. If anyone is here from Mercury, please correct me, but that's what I can recall right now.
And as the ACBO, a few weeks ago, we had a press conference in Bakersfield, which is in Kern County, and the purpose of it was to launch our canvassing efforts. And the reason for doing that was, to let local communities know that we're going to be out there knocking on doors, and that it's okay to open them, to talk to us about it. And we're also planning one in the next, sometime in early December in Fresno. And one of the main things we want to announce is that we're going to be wearing these light blue vests as an identifier. So that people know, like, oh, okay, so the vests, those are the census outreach people from community-based organizations.
But I also want to share that this is really valuable and important work that's going to be done. But there are also examples, I know of at least 2 examples, of people who impersonate census representatives. One of them took place in Fresno. At least we were informed about that last year. And another one took place in Merced County earlier this year. And the one in Merced County was the one that most troubling because there was no Census Bureau activity taking place. Like Joe just mentioned right now, there is some work that started by the Census Bureau in August to be able to visit homes and knock on doors and so on and so forth. But this took place around March or April of this year, where a person went to an Asian American home that the parents were immigrants, spoke little English, and they were harassing the adults who were there to provide not only information that you would expect in a census, but also asking them for their immigration status, for their income, for their social security number, and other information that has nothing to do with what the Census Bureau does. So that was reported by us to Census Bureau representatives. That type of impersonation, fraud took place, may be taking place. So it's something that we also have to be aware of as a potential reality.
We have one more question here on this.
Hi, my name is Susan Reyes. I represent the Association of Independent California Colleges and Universities. So we have 85 independent nonprofit higher ed institutions, and many of our institutions are already on the forefront of participating in census discussions and outreach. One of our most active universities is Dominican University in San Rafael. They've actually implemented the census into their curriculum, where the students are doing projects around the census and doing artwork with elementary kids, and there's a census video in Spanish, and many of our other our institutions are actively working with their local Mexican consulate office. For example, Concordia University is working with the Mexican consulate office in Santa Ana. And our office is also working with the Mexican consulate in Sacramento, coordinating our Steps to College event. And I just want to offer up AICCU as a partner.
Great.
Did I see you raising your hand? Okay, we have you in the front.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Fontano from the News and Review. So I thought your remarks about the civil rights issue and how there's going to be a disinformation campaign. To what extent do we need to have the narrative out there that explains why it's a civil rights issue and why there's going to be a disinformation campaign, that there is leadership, starting with the president, does not want an accurate census count?
Yeah. You have to ask me the easy question. No, it's a tough question to answer, but as a background, what I would like to invite you to consult when you have the chance, the Census Bureau released a report called the CBAMS study, Census Barriers, Attitudes, and Motivators study, research that was carried out by the Census Bureau at the national level that included focus groups, among other things. It examines how different social groups perceive the census and the participation, what issues motivate them to participate or to not participate. So as a background, I think that's really valuable to use. And I think the findings in that are very consistent with the research that was carried out by Cindy and the other researchers that were involved in the project. Because they find that different social groups have different motivators to get them involved. And that issue of civil rights, I think, is not really reflected, because it also wasn't asked in terms of that CBAM study or the ones that Cindy did. That wasn't the objective. But I think it's becoming, to me, it's becoming like the core, the heart of the issue to many of us who are involved in immigrant rights issues. It's an exclusionary, I think, trajectory, what you see in terms of the policies of the federal government, which runs against what the Census Bureau's job is supposed to be. So you have these different arms or representatives of the federal government sending out different messages and different ways of impacting immigrant families. That type of, that type of behavior is not only inconsistent, but it harms the work that is supposed to be done here. So for immigrant rights organizations, I think part of what the message that we have to do, and we try to integrate, to the extent that we can, the census-related work to the immigrant services-related networks that we have. It hasn't quite clicked yet. There's an increasing interest in the 2020 census, more are becoming involved, but we're still almost in dealing with two different realms of civil rights activity, if you will. The closer we get to the census dates and the census work, I think the more they're going to come together. But right now, I think it's still not fully joined as campaigns that really can connect very well.
See, I want to just say that the stakes are high, and making sure that people understand that. So California has more hard-to-count populations than other states. We are desperate. We've had more undercount on a normal time than other states. If there's a deliberate campaign, which I actually believe that there will be, to undermine people's participation in the census, that's a direct attack on our ability to influence national policy through our number of representatives in Congress and the number of electors in the Electoral College. It's also an attack on our ability to fund necessary services and infrastructure for California residents. It's an attack on the values of democracy, and it's an attack on this state in particular. There's no mystery that that's underway, that that's a part of the dynamic. Our job is to make sure that doesn't happen, and to continue in a number of other arenas to make sure that the values of this state are well represented on a national level.
And before we continue, we want to make sure that everybody is informed and knows that there is a phone number that if you suspect any fraud or if you've been a victim of the fraud, anything that is related to the census, there is a phone number you can call. It's 800-923-8282. 800-923-8282, where you can call and report any situations that are suspicious or that you think that you've been experienced any kind of fraud with the system right now.
So I just wanted to add that, I believe the civil rights angle is really important, and it's actually quite effective. And, as I mentioned in the past, I've done like a number of community conversations and also focus groups. And it does, when you frame the census in those issues, it does impact people in a positive way. The issue is you need time to do that, and it requires a conversation, right? Which is, going back to like our strategy is like really about like how do you create environments so that you can have those meaningful conversations, because that's what really changes people's mindsets. But yeah, that angle 100%, it works. I just haven't figured out how to do it in a short, like in a condensed form. But yeah, when you have the opportunity to discuss with people, it's effective.
Do we have any additional questions?
Back there.
I wanted to hear more about strategies to count the homeless.
What the state is going to be doing in addition with the Census Bureau, they're going to be launching campaigns to count the homeless over a series of days during the part of the census process. How that is done and what the work in preparation for that is going to take place, I really don't know, can't speak about that. What I can mention is that in that conversation that I had with this school administrator yesterday, for example, that was one of the key concerns for him. Because in the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, there is also a significant homeless population. I lived in San Jose for about 30 years and moved to the Central Valley in 2000. And I lived in East San Jose. So I went back to my old neighborhood 3 weeks ago, and the scenario had changed significantly. A lot of people living on the streets near the neighborhoods where I used to live. So I know that's an increasing, growing problem throughout the state of California, probably other places as well. But in the rural areas, it does manifest itself a little bit differently because of the scarcity of resources, because also people live in many small communities where just the local authorities and the resources are so extremely limited, overcrowded housing, people living in orchards, cars, you name it, and spread out over this vast territory that is larger than many states of the Union. So how we do that in a place like the San Joaquin Valley, I think it's going to require different types of strategies, tactics, and resources. And I personally don't know how to do that, but it was really welcoming to me yesterday to see that a school administrator, superintendent of a school district is very concerned about those issues and mentioned homelessness as a priority issue that he wanted to address.
So I appreciate that you asked that question because it causes us to think about how do we reach that hard-to-count population. The point in time counts that we do every 2 years involves a combination of going to the shelters where people are staying, knowing the numbers there, and in the same time period, having trusted messengers, people who with lived experience who help us find individuals who are living unsheltered. We go and count them and we do a little survey with them. So my guess at this point is that we'll do something very similar to that to include them in the census. Jenny has I think an answer for you.
So next week, some of the counties, Yolo and Sacramento County. Hi, my name is Jenny. Next week, Yolo County, Sacramento County, we're actually going to be meeting with the Census Bureau's group quarters coordinator, who is going to be counting the homeless, the prisoners and military bases, the dorms, and other types of group home situations, and we'll be talking a little bit more about how we can locally help with that. I do know that I believe 6 weeks in advance of the count, it's going to be a separate count, right? They're not answering the same types of questions. They'll be going out to the different resource centers. They'll be doing a count of those that are on the street. They'll be going to, the Fourth and Hope and the shelters, things like that, to get the homeless counted. So there is another strategy, another effort that's being done on the side to count the homeless. But there's still a lot of work that still needs to be done, but it is definitely on the radar, and we are working towards that.
So I'd just like to add on that, for example, as the ACBO, that is one of the gaps we identified, just because none of our partners work directly with the homeless population. But the counties, they're supporting some organizations, who work directly with the homeless and provide services to them in order to do, outreach. But obviously, the Census Bureau is the only one that can count the population. But the resources are going towards early education and motivation closer to April 1st.
Still have a question here.
Hi, my name is Joe Engel from NNR Publications, and we created a series, If Ice Comes Knocking, publication, English, Spanish, and then we also created a comic book associated with that. It's been really well received, not so well on Fox and Friends, but we found it to be really effective, especially, I'm kind of making a comment toward the reading level of residents and the ability for children to share with their parents if they don't speak English. The comic book was really effective and really popular. It was the schools want more. So it's we're working with several different regions on communication pieces, and we might have an associated comic book that goes along with that will be available. So we'll keep you informed.
Yeah, and I think that's great. One of the things that we've been talking about is developing photo novellas. So kind of like comic books, I guess, but same concept. But yeah, I think that's great, and that's what I was talking about developing materials that really resonate with the hard to count communities. So great.
We have one more question in the back.
I just wanted to say that the Latinx Committee, if you're in Sacramento, meets at La Familia on November 20th. So if you would like to join our efforts, come talk to me. It's at 6 o'clock. And we meet monthly to figure out, we have a whole schedule of activities. We're looking for volunteers to go out and help us with our kiosk and various events that we're having between now as the census is being counted. So we would love to have more volunteers.
Thank you very much. Do we have any?
Okay, nobody boo. I work for the U.S. Census Bureau, federal. My name is Tanya Kravchuk, and I just wanted to say that the census is bipartisan. So we have been around for 117 years, regardless of the
who's currently in office as the president. So I understand, as being a California resident, that there are a lot of feelings around this topic, but please try to remember that the census is bipartisan always. And I do want to say that I have my card and I am a resource. If you have questions, further questions about homeless or group quarters or whatever that may be, please come talk to me. We do have partnership specialists such as myself in pretty much every county, and we are tasked with working with the community and leveraging those trusted voices. So we are a resource for you. If you have additional questions or would like more information, please come see me.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Any additional questions or comments? Anything else that our panel would like to add?
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation, yeah.
Thank you once again to PPIC for the invitation and to everyone who took time away from their work and to be here with us. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for all the questions. You helped us think.